So joining me here on stage, next to me on my right, your left, is Mike Miller, who's a lifelong Alaska resident, a member of the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, the chairman of the Indigenous Peoples Council for Marine Mammals, and trustee on the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute and on the AU's board of directors. Next to him, John Moran, who's a research fisheries biologist at NOAA's Auk Bay Laboratory in Juneau, Alaska. John has worked across Alaska studying fish, birds, and mammals. And at the far end of the table, Lauren Wild, another Lauren, was born and raised in Sitka, Alaska. She is an assistant professor with the Fisheries Technology Program at the University of Alaska Southeast Sitka campus, where she also conducts research on whales in the Gulf of Alaska. Thank you all for being up here under the bright lights. All right, so the first question I serve up to you, Mike. Can you provide an overview of the marine mammals that have been important species of harvest for the native people who live in Shikakwaan? What animals are currently harvested locally, and how does harvest today compare to the past?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. I feel like I should give just a little bit more background. So I'm from Sitka. I was born here. My mother's side of the family is tribal from the Sitka and Huna, Klakwaan area. My Tlingit name is Katlachich, and I have a second name, Gunhadi, that was given at a brown bear party a few years ago. Also, quickly, she mentioned that I'm chairman of a group called Indigenous Peoples Council for Marine Mammals, and it's a really fun group that is a little bit heady sometimes because a lot of people don't know of it, but it's an indigenous organization of co-management groups that work with marine mammals. So 16 different groups around the state, polar bear, beluga whale, walrus, Aleutian region, Coeric. It's a very heady group sometimes, but it's amazing that we work together on issues related to MMPA and marine mammal issues. So, bringing it back home to Sitka, and Sitka tribe is a member with a specific marine mammal organization because marine mammals have been an integral part of the community here since people have been here. The animals that we see mostly, that we're familiar with, of course, are sea lions, sea otters, and seals. Historically, there's been a few others, but we'll get to that in a minute. There still is a really big harvest, and sea otters are an interesting case study because they were gone from here for a long time. So one of the reasons that Sitka is here in its present state was the Russian presence that came to an area that already was inhabited by the local community, the Tlingit folks that were here. But the sea otter trade really built up on the harvest that was coming from here. They, as we all know the story, they were essentially wiped out as a viable species here, but reintroduced in the 1960s. And it really is an interesting story of reintroducing a species into an area that had been, they just weren't there. And we know they can be a keystone species. And so reintroducing them into a food-rich area was really amazing to see them grow in the numbers that we've seen. And there's a whole nother, we could have a whole conference on that reintroduction, what it's meant to the local shellfish, the indigenous harvesting effort, and how that's played out to some of the resources coming back due to increased harvest from indigenous folks for sea otters, but that's a whole other topic. Otters now are harvested entirely. People really don't eat them. They're not a food source. And there's some reference to a little bit of it, but not largely a big food source, so they're still largely harvested for handicraft purposes. Seals are different, though, and seals have always been a big food source for Southeast Alaska folks and around the state. I know we're going to talk a little bit about how it's really important for the tribe to have harvest management initiatives in place to make sure that when people do harvest, they try to use all of the parts that people traditionally use. So we really encourage people. Maybe I was done. Okay, I'll speed up a little bit. So there's still, people, there's an active harvest that happens out, with folks from here still. Of course, you see beautiful handicrafts. And in MMPA, when in 1972 people were reauthorized to go out and take marine mammals, there was a strong reference to food, but also handicrafts as a way for economies to drive in local communities. Seal meat was it still is a big issue, but also that a lot of the different parts of the seal are still important part of keeping the culture alive. Seal oil was one of the big drivers, and the type of fish you get for salmon in Southeast is really dry. We don't have salmon like other parts of the state where there's a lot of oil in it, and our fish dries really, really hard. There's not much moisture or oil, and so people would always eat it with seal oil, and that's still to this day for the fish from around here. I was taught from some of my uncles and aunts who liked seal intestines. And so they taught me to take the intestines out and put a marble or a round rock in the intestines to clean them out and then braid them and smoke them, and they would eat them like that. It seems like we're seeing less and less of folks that are eating them like that, but there still is a strong, especially for oil, drive for that in the communities. One of the last, I'll jump to one of the species that isn't here now since the theme is changing environment. And a lot of people don't know this, but there was, for years, an offshore fishery that happened out at Sitka for fur seals. So for years, the fur seal migration would bring seals up as they're headed to the Pribilofs, and they would stop by the big herring masses of fish that were offshore from Baranof Island down towards Coronation Island. And then there was a traditional fishery from folks that did go out from Sitka to harvest fur seals as they were doing their migration. And hopefully there'll be a link for folks. There's an interesting Smithsonian article from the early 1950s called The Last of the Tlingit Fur Sealers. And it documented Herman Kitka Sr. and his family going out to harvest fur seals, as was allowed. But it is interesting, since we're talking about human impacts or climate impacts on migration of animals, and also what happened in that time frame, there was a big reduction fishery that was going on offshore for herring. And the fur seals were stopping to eat the herring. But as that reduction fishery started taking the herring out of the ecosystem, the fur seals increasingly couldn't catch them. And a lot of that study back in the 50s was documenting how the big fur seals still could catch small amounts of herring, but the small fur seals didn't know how to do it. And eventually, they just changed their pattern, that we don't see fur seals in mass anymore here. And I think that's a good example, hopefully, in transition here to how we could be talking about herring and not necessarily realize that all of a sudden how we're managing that could have an impact on a whole different marine mammal species, which impacts the population too. So could go on and on about it, but I'll go ahead and let you transfer from that example to other marine mammals.
Well, I hear you bring up both interaction with humans and shifting food resources as major drivers of some of those changes. And I've heard both Lauren and John talk about that being true for other marine mammals. Do you want to pick up on that?
Check. Okay. I'll start and pass off to John. So a big one that comes to mind with whale species that we've talked about is the increasing number of gray whales that we're seeing here in Sitka Sound in the springtime. And to keep it on the theme of herring, they're sucking up and eating herring eggs. And so that's something that we've noticed, this big shift in the past 5 or 6 years, and we're starting to look into kind of what's happening there. We know that there's a big population of eastern North Pacific gray whales that have very long migration down from Baja up to the Bering and Chukchi Seas to feed. And, we always had some gray whales coming into Sitka Sound. Some would come in the summer. We'd see them kind of south of town, we've talked about. And then we always, we've, for a number of years, have seen some gray whales coming in pretty small numbers, feeding on herring eggs in around April. But then around 2018, 2019, those numbers just really boomed up, and we started to see over 100, 150 in 2020 during COVID. That's around when the herring were spawning in the end of March. And I remember looking out my window while I was, quarantined. I'm already forgetting the terms. Well, we were all quarantining in our houses, and there were gray whales just right out in front in Western Channel over by Cassiana. And I was like, so the first thing I did was start calling people to kind of ask these questions of, well, what's the history? What do we know? Is what I've seen in my lifetime in Sitka consistent with what's the historical knowledge is? And so that's kind of where we started asking questions about what's going on with those gray whales that are coming in. And that also could be a whole nother topic of a talk, which we won't get totally into. But yeah, that's another kind of interaction, I guess, speaking to these changes that we're seeing in our ecosystem and how that cascades up or down the food chain. And so we're starting to look into that. And then with humpbacks, which is another big species that also feeds on herring before they spawn in Sitka Sound and elsewhere in Southeast Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska, we've seen some interesting changes as well, and a lot of that just in more recent times where we had that Pacific heat wave, and how we saw numbers of humpbacks dropped, and calf rates went down, birth rates went down, and then we're seeing some of that coming back. And in Sitka Sound, they seem to be doing well, maybe not in other places, and that might be my cue to pass it to John to talk about some more of the humpback stuff that we've been looking at, and he's been looking at too, around Southeast and Prince William Sound.
Yeah, it's all about the herring. So I worked with Jan Strelly for many years, and Lauren has replaced her to some degree. You can't fully replace Jan. But we used to play this game kind of in the spring, like, oh, did that humpback overwinter, or did it make its migration? We'd kind of look at the whales and go, yeah, that whale's skinny. Oh, that whale's really fat. It didn't migrate. Just kind of making it up. But then in the marine heat wave hit, and I think it was like 2015, 2016. We're still looking at these whales like that whale looks skinny. I see ribs. I see scapula showing. I can see the backbone. But it's September. Those whales should be really fat. And then another way we could tell, we'd go to biopsy a whale, and you'd see these. You pull up alongside it with your little crossbow, and you get lined up, and the whale's it looks like the back of a Volkswagen Bug, just a big, broad, flat, hard to hit target. But we were seeing there just steeper, more pointed looking backs. I'm like, yeah, something is not right here. So in Prince William Sound, it's herring. It's a herring story for the humpbacks. Sitka, they have some krill to eat, but there's herring here too, especially in the spring. In other parts of Southeast, it's kind of a mixed herring and krill show. But in those heat wave years, the whales were being weird. They weren't diving on big schools of herring or big swarms of krill. They were basically scratch fishing. They were swimming along the shorelines. They were hard to follow. They weren't going in one place, making shallow dives. They were looking for whatever they could get, and it showed up. As Lauren said, skinny whales. Reproduction basically stopped. Like, we were seeing no calves. And we also saw some changes in our entanglement rates. Usually they're entangled in, maybe in gill nets or maybe things that are set out in deeper water. We're seeing whales caught in mooring lines, in anchor lines, log booms, outhauls, just really close to shore. And we think it was just those whales, they ran out of food, and their typical food. Their big schools of herring and krill were gone, and now they're just trying to make a living. And in Prince William Sound, they didn't make it. A lot of the whales didn't make it. Lauren just did an analysis, on one of our surveys, and 64% of our whales haven't been seen since the heat wave in Prince William Sound. Southeast did a little bit better, but that's kind of where we are, and they have not bounced back in Prince William Sound. Other places are doing better, but we're just not seeing them coming back. So I will pass it on, I guess.
Okay, what about everyone's favorite topic, tourism? What are we seeing that the dramatic increase in tourism across Southeast Alaska is doing to humans' relationships with marine mammals?
Second on this. Dramatic increase the last few years, and it echoes a little bit what we saw in the statewide discussion. And I know how when we were talking to some of the folks up north that worked with whales when there was a lot of research going on. Billy Adams, who spoke here quite a bit of time during the pandemic time when there was no traffic, he talked about how the whales seemed calmer. And since pandemic, we've seen a dramatic increase in Southeast. Everybody knows, and there's lots of arguments back and forth whether it's good or it's good for the economy, but what does it mean for the ecosystem? We have had, and speaking for Sitka's Marine Mammal Commission's complaints of competition between not even eco-tourists, but whale watching vessels or marine mammal watching vessels competing with hunters on the fields. And that's troubling to hear. But I think there's a dramatic increase, and not taking a position one way or another if it's good or bad, but you can't add the scale of the vessels that are coming here, the number of people with all the support whale watching and people just nature viewing in small boats that we heard earlier discussion of just the sound issues in the water and tremendous amount of increased noise in the water. And I think it's still to be determined because it's still it's still growing rapidly, and I don't think there's clear direction for agencies and what to do for all the conflicts that are happening now. So it's growing though. So.
I have a quick anecdote on that too. I was out on the boat this summer. Jan Straley, who was my mentor in Sitka, many of you in the audience probably know the name or know her well. And she's one of the founders of Whale Fest and humpback whale biologist and gray and sperm whale and killer whale. So she retired a few years ago and moved south, but she was up this summer and we were out on the boat and we took her and her son out. We were looking for a whale that we call Domino, that maybe a lot of you in Sitka might know, who had a calf this year. And we've never seen her have a calf. And Jan first photographed Domino when she was a calf in 1995, right out in Sitka Sound. So she has a relationship with this whale, and so she had been hearing as soon as we have a relationship with a lot of the whale watching captains in Sitka. And one of those folks, Gary Downey, many of you may know, called us in May and was like, Domino has a calf. And so we were all really excited, and Jan was coming up in September, so we went out to look for Domino and her calf, and Gary was kind of pointing to tell us where we could find her. We got out there, and we did find her, and we were sort of just kind of hanging out, and it turned out to be a nice day. But we were just sort of sitting on the boat, and Jan, it's just one of these examples of just being able to absorb as much knowledge as you can from people. And she's been doing this for 35, 40 years, spending time with whales since the late 1970s. And she was, all of a sudden she goes, can't you see how their behavior's changing based on what we're doing with the boat? And what she was referring to was, there was some whale watching boats around, but not too many that day. But the Domino and her calf, every time there were boats around, including us, that would get within a certain distance, the calf would stick really close to the mom and dive right next to her and not show the flukes. And we were trying to get flukes from the calf for research purposes. And then if there was a period of time where we backed off and all the boats were off doing other things, looking at other whales, and so it was just us, and then Domino and her calf kind of moved into Eastern Channel, and all of a sudden they were coming up and the calf was more mobile and moving around a bit more around the mom, and then fluking and like kind of being a little bit more separated from the mom, and Jan just goes, can't you see that, don't you see that difference in behavior? It's like so obvious when there's boats around versus not. And so I think that's just something, I think about a lot too when I'm doing research of what that impact is. And we're gonna be talking about this, is gonna be a conversation I think that we're gonna be having as we have more tourism and more boats coming through and that interest in whale watching, so. That was my anecdote.
Okay, I'm looking at Heidi Pearson, so I'm going to be very careful what I say because she knows a lot more about these interactions and has really taken a lead on this in Juneau. But I will say, I think one of my concerns with the increased tourism, personally, is just the increased chance of ship strikes or vessel strikes with small boats. I think we're up to, 75, 80, I don't know how many just dedicated whale watching boats coming out of just Auk Bay alone. The increase in cruise ships, we had an increase in vessel strikes in Southeast from a variety of reasons, but just another kind of a sad story from, I think, a couple summers ago. One of our more famous whales in Juneau, Sasha, had a calf. The calf was named Tango, and Sasha and Tango together are just like the center of attention for the whale watching in Juneau. They're a super active, super fun calf. Tango was hit by a large vessel and killed and washed up on one of the nearby islands. When we performed the necropsy on her, she had been hit 3 more times before the vessel that killed her. There was evidence of small boat strikes. You could see where skeg ran across her back one way or prop marks another way, and another time that she'd been hit. So this one poor little calf had been hit 4 times before the calf finally died. So. Yeah, vessel strikes, just the increased activity that Mike was bringing up. More vessels, more people, more boats, more chance for these kind of negative interactions.
So for these negative interactions, such as entanglement or ship strikes or things like this, what kind of systems are in place for response?
So we have the Alaska, NOAA Alaska region has a stranding network. And the stranding network coordinator for NOAA is based in Juneau. And then essentially around the state, there's these volunteer networks that can respond and sort of report back to that stranding coordinator. So if somebody sees a dead or stranded or entangled marine mammal, the protocol is to call a stranding hotline that we have in Alaska. And, it's a 1-800 number. I should have displayed it, but you can Google it and it comes right up. And if you go check in with our Office of Law Enforcement folks that had the booth out there, they have little pamphlets that are good to carry on your boat, just so you have that stuff handy. But yeah, so the call goes into a 1-800 number to a hotline, a 24-hour hotline, and then they pretty quickly, a lot of hours of the day, a lot of days of the week, I'll get a text or something from that coordinator in Juneau. She's not texting me overnight, but later in the evening and early in the morning, and Saturday, Sunday, it's all fair game. And then we'll just sort of, get information and then figure out if we can have a response. Usually especially if it's a pinniped, a sea lion or something. I'll call Mike or text him and say, have you heard about this? And we'll just try to get as many, we have a little volunteer sort of network, and if Mike hears about something, he'll call me and say, have you heard about this? And we'll just make sure as many people that need to know. And then we have a lot of volunteers that will call, and if we need to respond, we can respond. A lot of it's weather dependent, or where the animal was, or what species it was. A few big ones, we had a humpback wash up in 2021 in March by Shoals Point, kind of out on the outer coast, and we did a big response there. It was an older female with a lot of herring in her stomach. And that one we had Ellen Chenoweth, who I think is in the audience, find her to talk more. Up there, she's waving her hand in the back. She and another gentleman, Josh Houston, who they put together this 3D virtual whale necropsy, and you can visit our website and find that as like an educational tool. So talk to Ellen more about that with questions. But that was a really cool educational way to deal with a stranded humpback and learn from it, and kind of in perpetuity, kind of keep that going. We had a 1-year-old female humpback die 2023 in March. That Stacy Golden, who may be in the audience, is running back there, is running a rearticulation effort to put together that skeleton that we're kind of working on. Yeah, so those are some of the big ones that we've had educational things, and then sometimes we strike out. There was a few aborted fetuses and some sea lion strandings and reports this summer, a few more than normal, it kind of seemed like. Mike and I were talking a lot about kind of the unusualness of that, and we went out one day, me and Mike and Ellen and Willa, who's also in the audience. All our volunteers are here. And didn't find the animal, but it had been reported washed up with an aborted fetus maybe, and so, sometimes we strike out, but that's the basic protocol. There's a stranding network, and then we also ask, and maybe John will talk a little bit about this, if there is a live whale entangled, definitely report it, call the 1-800 number, but don't approach the animal. It can be really dangerous, and there's, things that we like to keep. If it's trailing gear especially, that helps us keep track of it, so we don't want folks to try to go in and cut that off. Yeah. What am I forgetting?
Yeah, here's what not to do with an entangled whale off the bat. Do not jump in the water with a knife in your mouth and try to cut it free. And as Lauren said, do not cut the buoy off. That's all we have to go by. You see a whale trailing some shrimp gear with a buoy. People think, oh, I'm going to go save this whale, and I'm going to cut this buoy off. We'll never find the whale again. And right now, I think there's only 4 of us that are actually authorized to work on a whale, except for like Steve Lewis, who has done it a couple of times. There's different levels of responders, and Steve and Rachel have both helped out on whale disentanglements, and he can tell you it's a well thought out process. Number one, safety for the responders, and you want a well-trained crew going out there. You don't want any cowboys. You don't want the knife in your mouth, jumping up, posting things on YouTube how you saved the whale, because you probably didn't save it. You probably just cut some gear off and the whales has swam off. Human safety is number one priority, and as Steve can tell you, he was talking to us, as well as you can from Tanaki, relaying through different means, we're going to do a careful evaluation of the whale. What cut needs to be made first? How do we do this to get the gear off and not just, cut off a float and have the whale swim off and die somewhere else? So, definitely contact the stranding hotline or the large whale entanglement response team. If you can keep an eye on the whale, a location, describe, don't get close to the whale. Trailing gear is an issue. You may think, okay, I can come up behind this whale with my 100-yard approach that I'm allowed to do with federal regulations. There could be 300, 400, yards of gear dragging behind that animal. And if you're in your Lund or even your, Sea Sport or a Parker or a Hughes Craft, if you get wrapped up in that gear with your prop, your boat's going down. That whale is not going to slow down. You're going to spin around and get dragged backwards to the water and sink. it's dangerous. People have died. People have been severely injured. It's best leave it to the experts. So document as well as you can. Get the word out there. Lat long, direction of movement, all the things you'd think you'd want for like a man overboard type of or search and rescue situation. So that's kind of my soapbox about entanglement.
Okay, before we turn it over to the audience for questions, I did want to just give a little bit of time for all of you to share some of the top questions or new initiatives that might be going on with marine mammal research right now in this region.
I'll go. You know, we talked a bit about some of the issues, and I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed with the changes that are happening. It seems daunting that there's always some change, and we sometimes focus a bit on things that are seemingly almost out of our control. And it's easy to get into the negative, but there's a lot of positive stuff. It's amazing amount just at this last couple of days, the type of work that's getting done, the networking, amazing. I get to work a lot with the tribal communities around the state, and the acknowledgement and this is, I think, one thing for the students is a lot of these issues they're just kind of forever issues, right? And I always encourage people, don't network as much as you can. Don't let yourself get burned out, because a couple of years ago we had a conference that was a repeat of a conference that had been done in the early 90s, and people were asked to put their top 10 issues they thought were in the coming years, and somebody actually had a top 10 issue that they'd done in the early 90s, and they were almost identical. And at first it was a real bummer. It was like, Jesus, is that where we're at, after this amount of time? But people were like, these are forever issues. And I just encourage people, if you're an advocate or studying to become one, view it as the issues are always going to be there, and it's just how engaged you are and how we can respond and still be here. We're seeing, the tribe here have been involved with a lot of forage fish issues for years. For one of the first times ever, we see in this year's Board of Fish proposals a department-generated proposal to lower the threshold rate to 15% cap, which is, starting to consider ecosystem management as part instead of a single species management. And to me, that's, people are like, well, it's not much of a change, but it's a change in the right direction, right? And so there's lots of positive. I am heartened to see so many people that are pushing for this. So it's good to, I think, going out of here to think of all the good things that are happening. So appreciate being able to talk to everybody.
Yeah, another question from me, we're looking at this changing gray whales. I'm still working on humpback stuff with John and stuff in Sitka Sound with that. And then with the gray whales, what Richard said earlier, he said, you can't really learn about the change until you learn about the thing. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now with these gray whales coming in, is more like asking all these questions about who they are, where they're coming from, where they're going, what other things are they eating, what different populations are they maybe from, and there's just so many questions to ask, and that's really exciting for me. So I'm kind of in that learn about the change, or learn about the thing, so that we can then sort of learn about the change, and it's a lot of just asking people that know, and yeah, that's the big one for me.
Okay, I guess some of my concerns, the aquaculture movement, I don't know how marine mammals are going to interact with that. There's a push for more, kelp farms, different things, more lines in the water. So for my entanglement side of my job makes me wonder about what's going to happen. On the East Coast, they're trying to get gear out of the water to protect North Atlantic right whales. I guess on a positive note, and Lauren mentioned this, there's a baby boom of humpbacks going on right now. And It's in Sitka Sound and Prince William Sound. Our numbers are down, but there are a lot of babies up there given the numbers. I talked to Andy Zabo, AWF, said there's baby humpback calves all over southeast Alaska, so that's good. That's a good sign. That means the ocean's been productive. And we're seeing fat and happy transient killer whales having lots of babies. We were used to be told, oh, they're sneaky and they don't vocalize and they're secretive. And we found a bunch of them in the big groups splashing and playing and chatting with each other and making noise. And so we asked the killer whale expert, like, oh yeah, they're fat and happy. There's plenty of seals and sea lions around. They're just making babies and having a good time. So I think that's, I don't know, it's kind of a positive way to end everything. That there is a bright side. And as Yvette touched on in her talk with Apollo, like, we don't know how things are going to go. You know, we think we know what's going to happen, and we thought humpbacks were going to do this, this, and this, and then they don't. They do something different. So, yeah, I guess the future's uncertain, but there are definitely some positive signs out there.
Great. Well, I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. We have a number of minutes.
Hello. I have a quick kind of whale watching question. So as Juneau is like the largest whale watching fleet in the world, there's lots of commercial vessels out. Are there any hopes that in the future some of the voluntary rules, such as how many boats can be in an area or how long boats can be in an area, can we see those maybe become mandatory federal rules? Is there any hopes for that to try to stop all of the vessel strikes from occurring?
That is a great question. Is there any hope for that? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at Heidi. I don't want to put her on the spot, but it basically comes down to, probably limiting the number of cruise ships, the number of people coming through. I think that's it. I don't think our agency or NOAA has a lot of say over who can be on the water and when. It's not, I know Mike's nodding his head. He might have some more insight in this, but yeah, who's going to regulate it? Who's going to tell somebody that they can't run their business, I guess. But voluntary, that's probably the way to go to get people to volunteer, maybe back off a little bit. So yeah, I don't have a lot of positive things or optimistic things to say about that, so sorry.
Yes, I had two questions, sorry. One, I just got through hearing a thing that was on a webinar about how the Yakutat tribe had passed a resolution that said that they did not want to have, first off, their first requirement was that they wanted cruise ships I didn't know this, but there's two different kinds of fuels that can you use. One is a clean fuel and one is not so clean. And so they said they want in their territorial waters, and they defined what those waters were, their ancestral waters, that they did not want that dirty fuel used. That was number one. And then number two, their requirement was that no scrubbers should be cleaned in their ancestral territorial waters. And I thought, whoa, that is a good thing. I didn't even know that you could use two different kinds of fuel, dirty or not. And I didn't know that the scrubbers could be not cleaned in certain areas. So I immediately sent that information to the Sitka tribe because I worry so much about the pollution that we're getting here in with our increase of these huge ships that that's coming in. And so I don't know if you guys heard about that webinar or if there's any action I'm going to pursue trying to see, to just share that information with as many people as I can. The other thing I wanted to say was the herring. We have the same problem with the herring, and what I'm understanding from the research I'm reading now about the herring is that the Japanese market is going down, and so that now they're saying that there could be a market for our herring for fertilizer. And I'm hearing all of you guys talk about problems with our sea mammals, and we've got this wonderful group of gray whales coming in here and needing some more herring. We have a lot more pull on our herring, and then so what are we going to do? We're talking about the latest thing I've heard is that they are going to have, they want to fish for herring not during the spawn, which is a good idea, but still, there's the potential of taking more herring out is great. And it seems to me that taking our herring and making it into fertilizer is wrong, okay? And number one. And number two, there are gut boats in Sitka that take fish waste and they put it in a boat, a big thing, and then they go and they dump it all around our different sounds. I've seen maps of where they've dumped the guts in Sitka. And so what I'm thinking, well, that's just going to feed a bunch of fish, and it's going to just add more fertilizer to our ocean. But it turns out where they're dumping this gut boat waste, it's making a big mess on the bottom of the ocean. It's just piling up and piling up. And I'm thinking, well, golly, why couldn't they just take the gut boat waste and make that into fertilizer and leave our herring alone? And I feel like that it's commercial fishing for herring should be against the law, and every other place they've stopped that because it's a keystone species and it shouldn't be happening. So anything you can say about either one of those two things, I appreciate it.
Want to say anything? Oh, I can just nod my head.
Well, yeah, I agree. Obviously, we've talked about herring protection for a long time, and it's like almost like the enforcement of whale watching guidelines. It's a complex issue. We get a lot of feedback from other industries. Herring, though, is obviously it is keystone, and we use the fur seal example of how mismanaged whole migration changed of a species, and when things are going well, here's the gray whales. So positive notes, like I said, we see a state-sponsored proposal to start recognizing more ecosystem implications for herring, so it's a step in the right direction. There's not going to be any less pressure from yourself or the tribe or all the advocates to keep pressure from doing that. We did see, and I feel like I should comment on it because I was on it, was a herring revitalization committee that the State Board of Fish put together recently. And of note, it's different in different parts of the state, how people view herring, even for cultural uses in other parts. But it was interesting to me, I did mention that, in Southeast Alaska, there didn't seem to be much interest in trying to bring back a reduction type fishery. And I guess it was a public meeting, so that was echoed by one of the leading industry herring buyers who said, we know what happened when it was a meal fishery. It wiped herring out, and why would we want to go back to that? So I think people are starting to hear that argument, that there's huge value of leaving some things in the water but of course then you have good whales, and then there's more whale watchers, and that increases that problem, right? So it's constant. We have to always be watching and seeing how the impacts affect our communities, and weighing in to make sure at least we don't replicate some of the mistakes we made in the past. So it's not a clear answer for you, I guess, other than just encourage all of you to keep advocating, and for the organizations that are stepping up, keep supporting them. So.
Testing. I think that is all the time we have for questions. Sorry, John, subtle cue. Please join me in thanking our panelists who wrap things up for us.